Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Greg Wilpert in Baltimore. An investigation into the illicit arms trade has revealed that an Israeli security company known as Global CST and owned by retired General Israel Ziv has been funneling weapons to fuel the civil war in South Sudan. The U.S. has imposed sanctions against General Ziv because there is an international UN arms embargo prohibiting arms sales to South Sudan. The civil war in South Sudan, the world's newest country, has been going on for almost the entire time that South Sudan exists, for about 6 years now. And last week, the government extended the ceasefire agreement with the rebels that has been in place in 2 regions of the country since April. Over 400,000 people have been estimated to have been killed so far in this civil war. The investigative journalist who investigated the backstory of these arms sales is Sam Mednik, who has spent 2.5 years in Juba, the capital of South Sudan. According to her, money and resources earmarked for agriculture end up in the hands of private military companies. Sam Mednik recently published the results of her investigation with the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, or OCCRP. General Zieve has responded to the accusations of his illicit arms deals as follows.
It's nothing. It's just a bubble with no relation to reality. Our company signed an agricultural contract before a bit more than 3 years. And at that time, we also received the money. It's an amount which doesn't resemble, even a little, the sum which they talk about.
The president of South Sudan, Salva Kiir, recently interceded with Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on General Ziv's behalf by asking Netanyahu to help lift the U.S. sanctions against Ziv's arms company, Global CST. We are now joined by Sam Mednik, the investigative journalist to expose this story. She joins us from Juba today, where she is a freelance journalist with more than a decade of reporting experience. Thanks for joining us today, Sam.
Thank you very much for having me.
So, as people will see, this is a pretty complex story, and many companies are involved in this, and it makes it, of course, very difficult to follow the trail. In your story for OCCRP, you showed a picture that you took of a sign in Juba of General Ziv's agricultural company, Green Horizon, and later that sign was taken down. Now, what makes this sign so significant and incriminating, and how does it fit into the overall picture here?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily say that the sign is as incriminating, and it's not the biggest piece of the story. What it does show is it raises questions about affiliations of the agriculture project because there's a military seal on the sign. So it raises questions about the affiliations of who the agriculture project is associated with. But I would say that the bigger picture here is that this was a multi-million-dollar agriculture project meant to feed millions of South Sudanese, currently 7 million of which are facing hunger, almost 2 million of which are on the brink of starvation, and that there's very little to show for that project, according to some government officials by their own admission. So that would be the bigger picture to what the story was speaking to.
And tell us about what we think has happened to those funds. I mean, what is going on here? So apparently there's very little to show for it, and instead, what do you think is happening?
Well, according to the U.S. sanctions, Zieve and some of its companies were sanctioned for selling arms to both sides, the opposition and the government, during the civil war and fueling the civil war. For sanctions say that the farms were used as a cover. In our reporting, we show that there's no record for where these funds went, that $45 million, more than that, was given to the farming project, but there's no record of that money, of the $45 million that Zieve said went to the project in the government budget. It bypassed regular procedures that a government-funded project would go through, such as going through Parliament and being approved by Parliament. There's no detailed records of what the funds were spent on, according to several government officials who want those records. So there's a lot of sort of discrepancies and questions surrounding the project and the transparency of it.
When you went to Green Horizon Farms, you said you saw soldiers hanging out in the fields among agricultural equipment, and you were told that the program is for retraining veteran soldiers, which General Zieve calls adjusting to a post-conflict situation. Now, how do you know that this is not actually the case? What do we know there?
Well, I went to 2 farms late in 2017, and one of them was one of their farms, one of Green Horizon's projects, where they were growing some fruits and some vegetables, which I saw. And the second farm that I went to, it was it wasn't one of their official firms. It was a training project at the time. They said that they had short training projects for veterans to train them to go into agriculture after they got out of the army, demobilization. And so I mean, that's what I saw when I was at that project. And that project apparently was going on for a couple months, and the soldiers were there, and there were some plots of land that they were working on.
General Ziv is a former Israeli general who, like many others, started his own security company. But there are hundreds of security companies active in the global market, and many that are willing to violate international embargoes. So why does Israel Ziv stand out as a former Israeli general? What's the significance of that?
I think a lot of it would make sense for a lot of people who were former generals in any army to go into security and start security firms, and many people do, and that's not really the issue. A lot of people do that. I think the issue with this particular project, as I before, is that it's multinational companies profiting off of conflict, and taking advantage of countries with weak governance systems and a lack of oversight. And that is really the bigger picture here, that a multi-million-dollar project meant to feed the South Sudanese people, that didn't actually happen.
Now, what do you think needs to happen, in other words, in order to, I mean, this has been exposed now, but what has been the reaction, if any, to your reporting, and what do you think ought to be happening?
I think that people in any context, people are happy when there is accountability, when certain things are exposed that perhaps weren't before. And I think the idea is for South Sudanese people to not be taken advantage of or exploited by international companies that come in, by its own government here, by people who find ways to be able to do that. And so I think that the more projects like this are exposed and looked into, that there can be more accountability for the people involved, and then more services given to the people of South Sudan, to the civilians.
Okay, well, we're going to leave it there for now. I'm speaking to investigative journalist Sam Mednik, who exposed this a good part of this story. Thanks again, Sam, for having joined us today.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for joining the Real News Network.
Hey everyone, my name is Arud Sheikh, and I'm the Development Campaign Manager at the Real News Network. If we're going to stand up to the corporate elites, then we need your help to make people-powered media. And that's why I'm asking you to please donate to the Real News Network. And while you're at it, hit the subscribe button. Thanks so much.